to 2 Kings chapter 6 and beginning with verse 8. I talked just a little bit in Sunday school about the message tonight and left little tidbits, but what I felt led by the Lord to look at is that it's difficult sometimes for us as believers to not get despondent. You look around you, and if you were making a judgment, would you say that evil is winning or good? You'd probably say evil, wouldn't you? Particularly if you just watch the news. Have you ever noticed when you watch the evening news, nothing good seems to ever really make it? It's always so many people got killed, or something exploded somewhere, or some politician slipped again and did something wrong, or something like that, something along the negative thing. And same with newspapers. Have you ever seen a newspaper with a great big giant headline about how good things were? You know, they're usually always filled with tragedies or wars or different things. I remember I ran the cleaning crew out of the Seattle Times printing plant, and we were there on September 11th, 2001. Was that with one? And I remember everything being stopped, and they had to hurriedly run and come out with a paper, you know, and the headlines were like 3 inches tall about the towers and all of that tragedy, and remembering watching all that. So it's easy for us sometimes to think that we're on the losing side and get a little despondent about it. Churches across the country are struggling. They're struggling to keep their doors open financially. They're struggling for attendance. They're struggling for workers. You know, you think about a church that maybe had several hundred people, and you would think, oh, well, they got it made, you know, they got several hundred people. It's amazing how many of those churches still struggle for people to fill the slots that are needed. It takes more than a pastor and his wife to make a church. You have to have teachers. Without our children's ministry, how long would families stay? We have enough of a problem as it is, because as you know, our church attendance, we're at that size of a church to where a family comes in and they say, oh, they don't have anything for my kids. So what are they going to do? They go look somewhere else. Praise God for what's happening with Brian and Nicole, which you'll hear about in the business meeting, taking on our youth ministry. How long would you come if your kids didn't have anything? If there was nothing for your young people, you'd be forced to consider going to church somewhere else, because they need to have that influence in their life. I've become keenly aware. I got 2 that graduate this year, grandkids. That means that they're not going to be around for Grandpa to lecture anymore. Darn. They're sad, I'm sure. You know, they don't get those lectures on the way to church anymore. You know, but your time of influence. I had a long discussion with my grandson, who's 18 and good gracious, chomping at the bit. You'd think that home was the most horrible place in the world, and you just gotta, you know, if only they knew, right? Adults, oh man. You know, I'm gonna grow up, I'm gonna be an adult, and boy, everything's just gonna be great, and life's just gonna, good gracious, it isn't that way, is it? You grow up and you find out, you know, afterwards, you find out your high school years and your college years is some of the best times of your life. And you didn't know it at the time because you were wanting to grow up. Well, it's a strange world. that we face. It's difficult for us as Christians. I'm not very young anymore and been at it for a long time, and I get discouraged. I get discouraged when I look around and I see the need for people to be serious about their relationship with God, because the time's coming that they're not going to have the opportunity to deal with that anymore. Life does end. We do have to die and stand before God, whether we're young or whether we're old. It's going to happen, and people are frittering away their lives after the things of the world. So it's easy to get discouraged. So I came across this passage tonight. I want to share this story with you because it has some things in it that tell us to look up. Don't be discouraged. Be encouraged. Open your eyes and see what God hath in store. Chapter 6 and verse 8. Then the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servants, saying, In such and such a place shall be my camp. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, Beware that thou pass not such a place, for hither the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing. And he called his servants and said unto them, Will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, None, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, Go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, Behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he hither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was rose early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, what shall we do? Well, it's interesting. You know, Elisha is a prophet that you've probably never studied much. It's amazing because, you know, Elisha performed more miracles and exercised the power of God more than Elijah, who was his predecessor. But Elijah is the one that everybody talks about, and not Elisha. But Elisha, is something like 15 or 20 miracles that Elisha performed during his ministry. Now, he was a prophet, and a little bit of a different scenario in these days. They actually had like a school for prophets, maybe comparable to the idea of a seminary. And they would have young men who would come there, and they would be trained by Elisha, where they would study. So he was well known throughout. Well, war was very common in these days, and it was very civilized. You see, if you were going to fight a war, what you would do is you'd send a note. I send a note over here to King Allen, and I say, at such and such a date, I'm going to be outside of your city gates, and you bring your army out, and we're going to have a battle. And he'd send back a reply and say, come on, you turkey, you know, let's do it. But they'd were very civilized about it. That's one of the reasons I studied French history. It was interesting. Napoleon was a snake. Napoleon would pull up to the battlefield and get ready to do battle with the enemy, and he'd send over a message, you know, be there at 7 o'clock for tea and dinner. Because what the generals would do is they'd pull up for battles like these civilized kings, and they would get together to have big dinner the night before. Then they'd go back, and then the next day they'd do their battle. Well, Napoleon would pull up, send a note over, say, I'll be over at 7, and then he'd attack. And of course the other army wasn't ready, and so he'd be victorious. But in this day and time, it was a very civilized thing. So the king of Syria is planning a battle against Israel, and he's going to march over there, and he's going to fight this king, and whatever their quarrels were, who knows. But the king of Israel was privileged to be told by Elisha what his plans were. Can you imagine going into a battle to where the enemy knows your plans, knows what you're going to do, what you're going to maneuver here, you're going to maneuver there? Well, that's what was taking place. And so two or three times or more, the king of Israel had been saved from destruction by Syria because of Elisha's advice. So the king of Syria gets mad, thinks he has a spy in his works. And some servant spoke up and tells him, no, it's because Elisha is telling him your plans. Now, it doesn't tell us what the king of Syria thought, but what do you think he would have thought? Well, how does he know what's going on? You know, and you would go through the whole scenario to where there was probably an explanation. He's a prophet of God, and he knows these things. So the king of Assyria makes plans, and he sends an army and chariots, and they surround Dothan. Now, when the servant of Elisha gets up in the morning, what's he see? Somebody tell me. What's he see? All the enemy.
Around the house.
What were they doing?
They're sending a note. No.
Yeah. They're there obviously for hostile purposes, right? If you wake up in the morning and your house is surrounded by a bunch of hooligans, right? they're going to do damage to your house. That's what they're there for. So he goes and he sees this army. So what does he think? What does he feel? I'm listening. We're in Sunday school.
It's over.
It's over. Fear. Why? He's surrounded. All right, let me see. Now let me get this straight. Here's Elisha and his servant. How many is that? 2. Not a very big army, is it? 2. All right, over here is the Syrians with chariots and army. And it doesn't say how many there are, but there's enough to where they surround the hill. Okay, now you make your judgment. What kind of battle is this going to be? Not much. Pretty much of a slaughter. So he's fearful for himself, isn't he? Now he's forgot something. What's he forgot? Oh, I know. We haven't read that part yet, right? So you're going to figure that out. Down to verse 16. And Elisha is talking here, and he answered, because the question was, how shall we do? What are we going to do? And he said, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. Oh, that's a nice sentiment, isn't it? Let's see. Let me see. How many did we say was over here? 2. And there's probably 1,000 or more over here. Fear not, for they that be with us are more than 2. And the odds are not right there, are they? But what did Elisha know that the servant didn't? Why could Elisha say, fear not? Elisha had a thing called faith. Elisha knew that he was doing what God intended for him to do. So he knew that God was going to protect him. In fact, they probably already had a conversation about this. And he already knew what was going to take place. But he had faith in God. Let's read on and see what it says. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. Let's see. That too has changed, hasn't it? Now it's a large number comparable to the others. Now let me ask you a question. If there's a battle between, what do you think these are that are around the hill? These ones that he's opened his eyes and see. You think they're angels? I think so. If I had to wonder about a battle between a group of angels, that obviously are pretty impressive to look at, and Assyrians, have the odds changed? They've changed dramatically, haven't they? Now, there's a lesson there, isn't there? A very powerful lesson. Elisha had faith. He had faith in a God that he had seen do many, many things. He had faith in God trusting him, and he probably saw all of this before the servant did. Trusting in God.